The point of the story is this, and indeed all three stories have been building to this point. It's that it's not about the faithfulness of the covenant partner of God, Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. It's about the faithfulness of God that maintains the wealth of God's promises through the generations. Anybody interested in learning what that word hinneh means? Here it is. Hinneh does not just mean to see, it means to see through another's eyes. It means to see the world through someone else's perspective. It means to walk a mile in someone else's shoes in modern parlance. And in each story, there's a moment where it's not a common word. This obscure Hebrew word is intentionally chosen. The storyteller puts us into the eyes of Rebekah's midwives. In Genesis 25:24, like we're there in the delivering room as two warring nations are born. The storyteller puts us into the eyes of King Abimelech as he looks out the tower palace window and sees Isaac caressing Rebekah in Genesis 26 verse 8, like we're watching along with him at the faithlessness of Isaac showed in deceiving the king. And then the storyteller turns the volume up, turns the heat up in Genesis 28, using this obscure word 4 times in Jacob's story. He says, come, I want you to be there in the dream Jacob had. Whether he's using the stone as a pillow or not, I want you to see it through his eyes. Do you see the ladder stretching between heaven and earth? Can you see the angels coming up and down the ladder? Can you see that the Lord God Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, ruler of angel armies, stands atop? And then do you see God uses this word, hinneh, through my eyes. God uses that word to Jacob. He says, behold, see through my eyes, Jacob, God's eyes, I am with you. Do you see this? God is both the Lord God King on the top of the ladder, ruling over all things, and he's the one next to Jacob at the bottom of the ladder. He's the one at the top ruling, and he's the one at the bottom walking with the lonely, wounded wanderer. He's the God at the top and at the bottom. He's the Jesus who left the throne of heaven to see the world through human eyes, to walk a mile in our shoes, to live as any one of us, yet without sin, to die for every one of us because of our sin. He's the Jesus who knows your sorrows, the Jesus who has felt your pains. He's the Jesus who sees your needs and knows you're wandering in the wilderness. He sees you. He's seen the world through your eyes, and he invites you to see the world through his eyes. He sees your faithfulness when you are crushing it for Jesus, and he sees your faithlessness, no matter how public or private that may be. He sees that, and he comes to be with you. He sees your years of prayer and of sacrifice and intercession and inquiring like Isaac and Rebekah. He sees your worry about whether God's going to work it all out or not and try and control it for yourselves like they did by saying, oh, she's just my sister. He sees you in the wilderness and in the wandering when you think you're far from him. God sees you and he knows you. And he's shown his faithfulness to you right there at the cross. Our God is a God who sees you when you're trusting him, when you're in his will, when you're wanting to see the promises fulfilled. Our God is a God who sees you when you're disobeying him. And our God is a God who sees you when you're far from home and think you're far from him. The simple point is God is faithful. Faithful to his promises even when we are faithless. That's the story of the Bible. That's the grace we see in Jesus. So, let me apply it this way. Here's my call to action. Here's my applying this group of stories sewn together by this obscure little Hebrew word, hinneh. I think he's calling us today. Jesus is inviting you today to be pals of God, his friends in relationship with him. 4 things we do as pals of God. Here's my summary: to pray, to ask, to listen, to see. So, if you're like Isaac and Rebekah, you're waiting for God to fulfill his promises, do the first one. Pray. It may be a year, it may be 20 years, it may not be on this earth that you see the answer to the prayer, but pray, because God is faithful. One day you will see God fulfill his promise, and that's why the word hinneh is there, to see it through the midwife's eyes. God's faithful. It took 20 years, but you see it through the midwife's eyes. He's delivered, if I can play that pun. Pray. To be pals of God, pray. If you're like Isaac and Rebekah in famine, if this season is a famine season for you, and there's a mix of trusting God and deceiving others, ask. Ask. Ask God to show you your sin through the eyes of whom it affects. Hinneh is the eyes of Abimelech watching this sin, how it impacts these people. Because Isaac was doing what was right in his eyes. Oh, my wife is so beautiful, they might kill me to get to her. But ask God to give you eyes to see how your sin, how your faithful or faithlessness impacts others, not how it impacts you. To be pals of God, you might be like Jacob, wandering in a wilderness of uncertainty, or it might be someone in your family. It might be a child or a grandchild that's been wandering from God for a long time. Listen. Listen to a God who's at the top of the ladder in glory and at the bottom of the ladder in sacrifice. See through his eyes that he rules the cosmos, and he came to this earth to die for creatures he created. Listen to a God who sees you, who knows you, and who pursues you in love. To be pals of God, pray, ask, listen, and ultimately see. Jesus, the ultimate proof of God's faithfulness to his promises, teaches us to hinneh, teaches us to see heaven, see the world through heaven's eyes, to be kingdom-minded in all we do. That's a whole other sermon. The sermon's called the Sermon on the Mount, and it's written in Matthew chapters 6 to 8. Go read that this week. But let me pray. Let me pray to conclude.